Something I've never quite understood about Star Wars fans is, well, a lot of things. Star Wars fans are kind of the worst, and I say that as a Star Wars fan, but there's that element where people keep talking about Star Wars as a possible future. They say that Star Wars exists in the future, like Star Trek, that Star Trek happens in the future. Of course it does. It ostensibly does. It's part of the entire premise of the franchise. But Star Wars, saying that Star Wars takes place in the future, in a future version of Earth, is just laughable to me. It seems obvious from the movies themselves that it does not take place in the far future of Earth. If it takes place in relativity to our reality as we know it at all, it of course takes place in the far, far past. It says right at the beginning of every movie, and except for the Star Wars story movies, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That means it took place geographically and astronomically far, far away from us, and it also took place many, many, many years ago. This is a fairy tale. This is an epic legend that took place in the past. So you could say that it takes place in another dimension. It takes place in, like Lord of the Rings, it takes place in reality entirely divorced from our own, like Avatar. It's just a fantasy story. Or you can say it takes place in the far past of our world, like some people do say Lord of the Rings is a mythology meant to show a creation story of our Earth. Middle Earth is a stepping point to the creation of our Earth, or the Dragons movies, the How to Train Your Dragons movies, eventually were revealed at the end of number 3, spoiler, to be an origin story, to have taken place in the reality of our Earth. And that the dragons go away to another land, and that sets the stage for the modern day Earth as we know it. Now, that all being said, I prefer to think that they do take place in our world, and that they take place millions and millions and millions and millions and bajillions of years ago. It's what's known as a depiction of a hyper-advanced prehistoric civilization. A prehistoric civilization that had a lot of technology that we ourselves do not have yet, but was ages and ages ago, and all that technology was lost over time. So how would that have happened? How would we have gotten from there to here? There's never a planet called Earth in that universe. Would we think that Earth is a planet in the Star Wars solar system that goes under a different name? And over the course of time, as the planet lost its other identifying factors, such as the hyper-advanced technology and all that, it eventually turned into Earth as we know it. I would argue against that. I would argue that because we never see dinosaurs in Star Wars, and dinosaurs are the oldest species that we can find on Earth, and with bones littered about, that that's not the case. That Earth was a different planet outside of the solar system, especially since the title card does say that the Star Wars universe is a long, long ways away from where we are. I would contend that it happened like this. At the end of Star Wars Episode 6, we know for a fact that the Empire is defeated by our nice little band of heroes, and then whether you want to go by Legends continuity or canon continuity, certain things are very strictly adhered to. There's a couple more skirmishes with the Empire going forward, sometimes on Jakku, sometimes in other places, sometimes involving Admiral Thrawn, sometimes not involving Admiral Thrawn. But the point is, a bunch of Imperial people won't let up even though the Emperor is dead, and they fight the rebels for a little while longer until the Imperial Remnant, I don't remember if that's a Legends term for them or the canon term for them, but either way, the Imperial Remnant, I like to call them, the remains of the Empire, decide to leave the galaxy entirely. Now, we know that the Star Wars universe is full of aliens, and that humans and aliens exist pretty much peacefully, except for the Empire. The Empire, like the Nazis that they're based on, are obsessed with the purity of their race. They're obsessed with white humans. Now, they would go into this when they left the universe, licking their wounds and angry about their defeat. They would most likely stick to that doctrine, but not as militantly. They wouldn't probably go out trying to kill all aliens, but they would probably isolate themselves from other species, trying to maintain the purity of their own race in an attempt to build up power with the hope that they will eventually become strong enough again that they can take back what was once theirs. Now, I would imagine that generation upon generation of these people would be formed, and there wouldn't be that many of the Imperial remnant who left. There would be a good number of them, but there wouldn't be as much as you would hope. So there would probably be a very limited number of families that would form into several different houses, so to speak. Different family houses that would try and carry on their family line over time and carry on the purity of the human race in another galaxy. And who knows how many houses there might form, but they would of course go to where supplies would be abundant. And oftentimes when people are down on their luck, they turn towards drugs. They turn towards substances that make them feel better because mentally they don't want to deal with the crushing weight of their own failure. So, as we know in the Star Wars universe, the drug of choice is spice. There are several different kinds of spice throughout the universe that do different things to people. Some of them even give people fuel for ships traveling from place to place, or of course a lot of them get you high, and all sorts of different things. Those are expanded on in novels in both canon and in the Legends Star Wars universe. Then of course, so when they would go out when the Imperial Remnant would go out into these places with their different families, and I'm sure the different the new tribalisms that would incur among those people, they would try and find a galaxy more or less divorced from any other aliens, but a place where they could set up shop and start both raising families and trying to build back a power base, but also where they could get as high as possible so that they could forget about how badly they'd been beaten by the rebellion, the New Republic. So, if they found, let's say, a planet that had a super spice, a spice that was so potent that it had a variety of uses, not just getting high, they would most likely settle there and create a bartering system amongst themselves and a political system and possibly even religions based around the effects of this spice. A spice that might even affect the midichlorian counts of the people on these planets, that might cause them to have a higher awareness of reality or increased physical abilities, as we've seen Jedi often have when they're truly connected to the Force. And of course, this, as you can see, the most obvious thing is that Star Wars immediately leads into the universe of the Dune novels and the TV miniseries and computer games and the David Lynch movie. And of course, I mean, I think everyone's had this thought, like, it's just obvious that after the events of Dune, over the course of Dune, with the constant infighting and the constant new messiahs that keep popping up every other book in that series, eventually the different families, the different clans, houses from those, from those books would keep fighting over time. Eventually, some houses would just be wiped out completely. Some houses would be wiped out completely. Some houses would leave. Some houses would just dissipate. And eventually, I believe that this does happen in some of the books, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember, but in some of the, I think in some of the books, like some of the spice is completely wiped out at one point or something like that, but either way, like, eventually they would start to run out of this resource and have to find other galaxies, and the power paradigms would shift, and their culture would shift and turn to something else. And with what houses were left, say, let's just pick a random number, 12 houses. 12 houses would be left out of all of those houses that they originally had. And those 12 houses would form little colonies on separate planets in a galaxy adjacent to each other. They wouldn't want to go too far because old habits die hard. They'd probably want to stick with their own kind. They wouldn't want to mix too much with other alien races. And then eventually, of course, as we know, in Star Wars, the droids. The droids are servants and warriors and essentially slaves of humankind and alien kind and everyone in Star Wars. But we also know that they are sentient. They have emotions. They have the ability to feel pain. We know this from C-3PO and R2-D2, of course, but also several other droids over the course of the franchise, both in film, TV shows, and in comics and novels. They all have personalities and personas. They're not just animals. They're not just machines. They're people. And it's one of the weirdest choices about that franchise that they just have them as slaves. Now, in the Dune books and novels, they have little robots, but they never really have anything on the same level as a Star Wars droid. So where did they go? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the kind of people that would have gone with the Imperial Remnant, leaving the galaxy rather than living in the new one where they were no longer in power, wouldn't be the kind to treat their droids too nicely. So but they would also be the kind of people that wouldn't be able to live without having some sort of droid that they could live with. So I would imagine that the droids would have gone with them to the planet, to this galaxy, for the galaxy from Dune, initially, and would have served them for a number of years. But after a while, I would imagine that the legacy of abuse that these droids would have suffered at the hands of these insecure dorks would have caused them to eventually gain enough of a backbone to rise up and have a kind of rebellion. And at which point, if they didn't wipe out the humans entirely, which apparently they didn't, given the Dune universe, it continues on, they would eventually at least leave that galaxy and form a society of their own, where they would find a way to progenate more and more droids and become their own makers out there among the stars. And it might be the case that when the humans eventually leave the galaxy, after the spice had dried up, several generations later, they may have forgotten about where the droids ran off to and may run into them again, may have realized that the droids may run into the droids again, and the droids, with much longer memories than humans, since they're computers, and computers don't forget easily, would have seen the humans as their enemy and would have started a war with the humans. There would have been a great battle between the humans and the robots, a great war that may have lasted many, many generations before a peace could finally be found. But of course, the robots would know that inevitably the humans could not be trusted. They would know the history of the humans and how duplicitous they could be. So they would not accept a peace easily, and would most likely renege on that peace as first chance that they got, and attempt to wipe out the human scourge forever. In which point the humans would be scattered and lost, and the very few people remaining from those 12 tribes would have to look into finding a way to follow the path of another one of the tribes, one of those tribes that left the galaxy before the rest of them in fear of being destroyed like some of those other houses had been. The lost 13th tribe, if you will, that reportedly went on a religious quest to find a planet that myth had told them was called Earth. And that's where Battlestar Galactica comes in. So this is all I'm saying. Like, I don't understand why people say that Star Wars happens in the future when clearly, I mean, this is all obvious, right? I can't be the only one who sees this. Clearly, this is all very obvious. Everyone knows this. I need therapy.